Former FBI Director Jim Comey continuing a promotional book tour for his new book while defending his leaks to the media. Comey said that he authorized his friend to share the contents of one unclassified memo with the media regarding a conversation he had with the president. He also says that he was a private citizen when he turned over a total of 4 documents to his friend. Senator Lindsey Graham is with me right now to discuss that. And what do you make of all of this? You know, he told Bret Baier, right, that's not a leaker. I gave the memo to my friend with the intent to hand it over to the New York Times. That sounds like a leak to me, Senator.
Well, he gave it to 2 other individuals, one a former special counsel, Mr. Fitzgerald. But here's what's important. Comey said he did this for the express reason of hoping a special counsel would be appointed. So he made a decision, James Comey did, to try to press the system to appoint a special counsel. If that doesn't show a motivation and a bias against President Trump, I don't know what would. But here's the real issue for me, Loretta Lynch versus Comey. Comey says that Loretta Lynch told him, don't call the Clinton email investigation, call it a matter. She denies that. Comey says there's classified information that if ever got to be revealed would destroy Loretta Lynch's credibility when it came to the Clinton email investigation. These 2 people need to be brought to Congress, put under oath, and resolve this conflict. James Comey, I don't trust him. I think he was part of an effort at the FBI to give Clinton a pass. The way they conducted the investigation was a joke. The thumb was on the scale. The head investigator by the FBI hated Trump, like Clinton. They were trying to come up with an insurance policy to make sure that Trump didn't win the election. They talked openly about how much they hated Trump. And I think the Clinton email investigation was a joke.
And I assume that is what we are going to hear from the forthcoming IG report, which is expected to focus on Jim Comey's behavior as well as the handling of the Clinton email scandal.
And let's fill that out. Comey said to Bret Baier, I didn't know the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign paid Fusion GPS money to prepare the dossier. If you ask the FBI today how much of the dossier is verified, almost none, and the verification comes from open media sources. This dossier was prepared by a foreign agent paid by the Democratic Party and used to get a FISA warrant, and the FBI, former FBI director, did not know that it was a political document paid by a political party. To me, that is stunning. Right. Not only was the Clinton email investigation a joke, the dossier was used inappropriately.
So how do you call yourself someone who, agrees with and follows the rule of law if, in fact, you used a piece of garbage as, the reason to wiretap and listen in on an American citizen? It's the whole thing. And the point you made about the special counsel motivation, that alone makes it important government research or government information. So it's all, we're going to learn a lot once this IG report comes out. And then there's Brennan and Clapper, Senator. So John Brennan has been out in the press, criticizing President Trump along with Mr. Clapper. Yesterday, Brennan tweeted this: Mr. Trump, your hypocrisy knows no bounds. Jim Clapper is a man of integrity, honesty, ethics, and morality. You are not. Jim Clapper served his country for over a half-century, including in Vietnam. You did not. By your words and behavior, you diminished the office of the presidency. Here we have the former head of the CIA, the former head of intelligence. You've got Clapper and Brennan trashing the president. Meanwhile, they may very well have been in on the fix to try to knock down Donald Trump and keep Hillary Clinton in charge.
Does Brennan and Clapper sound like 2 people who would give Donald Trump a fair shake? Let me read a email exchange between the lead investigator of the Clinton email investigation and a DOJ lawyer. I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, and who's Andy, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. God, Trump is a loathsome human being. Trump is an F-idiot, is unable to provide a coherent answer. These are the people in charge of the Clinton email investigation. The dossier was prepared by a foreign agent paid by the Democratic Party. This whole thing stinks. We should have a special counsel looking at DOJ corruption, looking at how the dossier was given to the court. And finally, the number 4 person at the Department of Justice, Mr. Bruce Orr's wife, worked for Fusion GPS, worked with Michael Steele, who prepared the dossier, and he was Steele's handler. If the shoe were on the other foot, it'd be front page news all over the world.
That's exactly right. Senator, it's good to have you on the program this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Lindsey Graham. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
It took us a long time to actually get this, what's called the electronic communication, as we know it now for your viewers. What that is it's the original intelligence, the original reasons that the counterintelligence investigation was started. Now, this is really important to us because a counterintelligence investigation uses the tools of our intelligence services that are not supposed to be used on American citizens. So we've long wanted to know, well, what intelligence did you have that actually led to this investigation? So what we found now, after the investigators had reviewed it, is that, in fact, there was no intelligence. We think there's some major irregularities at the State Department, and we're trying to figure out how it is that this information about Mr. Papadopoulos, of all people, who was supposedly meeting with some folks in London, how that made it over across into the FBI's hands.
That was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, on with me here last week, saying that there was no official intelligence used to start a probe into possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia to tilt the elections. The California Republican is now saying that he's investigating the State Department. This, as that same committee concluded in a final report this week that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Republican Congressman Peter King joins me now from New York. He sits on the House Homeland Security Committee and the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence. It's good to see you, Congressman. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much.
I find this all so extraordinary. They had absolutely no intelligence to launch an investigation into Trump. That investigation is ongoing, which led to a special counsel, Robert Mueller, who is investigating this. And they continue to say there's no collusion. Your reaction?
Yeah, listen, I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I fully agree with what Devin Nunes said. Well, we can't go into all the details, but as Devin said, to begin a counterintelligence investigation, you have to have some intelligence. Instead, there was a story that came outside normal channels, a backdoor way, and this was really, and even if this were meant anything, it's not enough to start an investigation. But they got it improperly or through irregular channels. It was very inadequate information, and they used that to begin a FBI counterintelligence investigation of a presidential campaign. And then later on in March, when Director Comey announced on national television before a committee hearing that the president's campaign was being investigated, as if this was a major announcement. And, when we go back and look at it, it was based on basically gossip. It did not come through normal channels. It did not warrant an investigation like this. And also, Jim Comey was giving the country the impression that the president was being investigated, even though he knew the president was not being investigated, but refused to make that public. So this all is a very shameful chapter in the history of the FBI.
These people are sitting atop huge jobs. Jim Comey, the director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, the assistant director of the FBI. It certainly appears that they abused their power because they just didn't like where the election was going. They didn't like that Donald Trump was about to win, and then he does win. They talked about this insurance policy that Lindsey Graham just read us from the text from Peter Strzok and his girlfriend. Will there be any accountability here, Congressman?
Maria, I think there has to be. I think we are going to soon see the Inspector General's report of what went on at the top levels of the FBI. I hope that is more revealing than what we've heard so far. And, when you look at all this, if you want to call it circumstantial evidence about Comey, about McCabe, about Strong, about all of them up there, That is far more significant than anything that was ever brought up against Donald Trump or the Trump campaign. And yet there was this massive now 18, 20-month investigation, federal investigation going on of the Trump campaign, and the evidence is none. And yet there is much more circumstantial evidence, at least, against the highest levels of the FBI. In the case of McCabe, you actually have the Inspector General accuse him of lying.
And it's still going on. Look at the smear campaign that they just did against Ronnie Jackson. Look at the way that Brennan and Clapper are out every day trashing President Trump. I mean, look, we had Bob Goodlatte on, the chairman of the chairman of the Judiciary Committee on this program, and he said, I am going to subpoena these documents. 1.3 million documents. Have you seen the documents that the committee wanted, that the Intel Committee wanted as well? Or are they continuing to stonewall?
Now, there's so many documents we have not gotten full access to. And you mentioned Brennan and Clapper. The CIA and the intelligence agencies were telling us all along, for instance, up till December of 2016, that there was no way of knowing who the Russians may have been favoring in the election. Suddenly, on the front page of the Washington Post on December 6th or December 7th of 2016, the story appears with all of this so-called classified information, how the Russians were definitely behind Donald Trump. Where did that come from? I mean, Brennan was head of the CIA. Clapper is a director of national intelligence. Did they launch any investigation? I mean, and only a few people would have had access to these facts and these conclusions. And yet that was leaked against the Washington Post. And yet, as far as I know, there's been no repercussions over that. So Brennan and Clapper, they are the people at the top. They're the ones responsible for this. Whether they did it or not, they're responsible. And they're going out, they have the nerve to be criticizing President Trump when they allowed the worst leaks probably in the history of intelligence.
And they're still at it. I mean, they're still, you know, earlier this weekend, Clapper sends a tweet out and says, stay tuned, Mr. President, stay tuned, Mr. Trump. As if something else is coming out. They're now CNN commentators, and they are still taunting this president, even though we know the reality and the facts. No collusion, no intelligence. It's pretty extraordinary. Congressman, before you go, I got to ask you, the president said next time he's up in terms of the potential for a government shutdown, he is going to allow the government to shut down if there's not money in there for the wall. You signed that omnibus bill. You're talking about a $47 trillion budget, and you couldn't come up, you and your colleagues couldn't come up with $25 billion for the wall?
First of all, I do support the money for the wall, but the reason I voted for that bill is because President Trump personally asked me to, and he also tweeted to all Republicans saying that we should vote for the bill because while it wasn't perfect, it was the best we could get at the time. So as far as, listen, the president can use all negotiating tactics he wants. I'll support them, but the bottom line is I don't believe we should shut the government down. It's never worked in the past, and with elections coming up a month after that, that would enable the Democrats to win, and the first thing they will do is move to impeach President Trump.
Isn't that what they want?
The government, they want the government to shut down, and they want to impeach Trump. That's what I'm saying. The president, this could really boomerang on him if Republicans are looked upon as being responsible for not being able to govern and shutting the government down. But we should fight hard for the wall. But let's not be shutting the government down. It doesn't work.
All of that to get in all of this extra spending just to protect our men and women who put their lives on the line every day, who we want to support in terms of the military. It's just extraordinary what's going on, Congressman. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Always a pleasure to see you, sir.
Okay, Maria. Thank you. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you so much. Former FBI Director Jim Comey says he did not leak memos of his conversation with the president. We're talking with former Assistant Director of the FBI, Jim Kallstrom, about that next. Back in a moment as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures.
I sent Mr. Richmond a copy of a 2-page unclassified memo and asked him to get the substance of it out to the media.
Did you leak other things through Mr. Richmond?
Yeah. I'm smiling, Brett. I don't consider what I did with Mr. Richmond a leak. I told him about an unclassified conversation with the president, and I didn't consider it part of an FBI file, all the things that I talked about with Anderson.
You wrote it as an FBI director. It was a work product.
No, it was not.
You said in the memos, I said, I don't do sneaky things, I don't leak, I don't do weasel moves. But I mean, we can argue what a leak is, but that's a leak, isn't it?
It's not.
Those comments from former FBI Director Jim Comey sparking a firestorm of reaction over the definition of leaking. Let's bring in James Kallstrom. He's a former assistant director of the FBI, and get his reaction. Jim, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for weighing in this morning. You know, if it wasn't important and part of the FBI work, then why did it have an intent to get a special counsel? I mean, the whole thing. Your reaction, Jim Kallstrom.
Well, I think he's lost his mind, Jim Comey. I don't understand, what his act is. This book tour and all this nonsense about it's not a leak. Of course it's a leak. Without question. I mean, and his conversation with the President of the United States is automatically classified. At least it was when I was in the government, unless they've changed rules like that. But Maria, we're in a 3-act play, and it's not a comedy. It's a tragedy. Act 1 was to stop Mr. Trump from becoming the President of the United States. That failed. Act 2 was to diminish his ability to manage the country. And even with that, he has done a fantastic job. I say that as someone who's not affiliated with either party. But look what he's done. Even with all the backlash and all the nonsense that's going on, there is no question that there's a cabal, a fifth column, a conspiracy, call it what you may, that involves people in the intelligence community, probably involves people over in Great Britain who have probably fed information to people like John Brennan. I don't know that for a fact, but it would not surprise me. And this is really a nasty, nasty Act 2 that's going on. And people in the United States, I mean, we have to violently react to this, not from the standpoint of guns and bullets, but from the standpoint of stopping this. This cannot go on in the United States. This is third world country stuff.
Yeah, I just wonder if there will be any accountability here, Jim. I mean, we are waiting for the IG report to come out, and it is expected to zero in on that. But, the left is digging in. I mean, look at James Clapper and John Brennan. Clapper texts or tweets out at the president yesterday, taunting him, basically almost threatening him. Stay tuned, Mr. Trump, is on his tweet. Saying that he doesn't believe that there was no collusion. The House Intelligence Committee just told us that there was no collusion. He's calling it a highly partisan, incomplete, and deeply flawed report by the broken House committee. And then he says, stay tuned. Your thoughts on Clapper and Brennan and their role?
Oh, I think it's outrageous. I think, they are in fact threatening. And who are they to be threatening the President of the United States? They're not in the government anymore. They're private citizens. They can say what they want, I guess. But it's just outrageous. And I have no doubt that they've conspired with others, including Jim Comey and others unnamed at this point. And the big tragedy, the big catastrophe for the country, we haven't even talked about yet, and that's the unmaskings. That's the Samantha Powers claiming that she didn't even know about it. That's the John Brennans. That's the people probably at NSA. That's this whole cabal, violating the rights of American citizens. And here we got a Deputy Attorney General that signed a continuation of a Pfizer order that's full of fictitious, bogus information. And he's still the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. I can't figure that one out.
And by the way, the Clinton people, whether it's, you mentioned power, but let's not forget Huma Abedin or Cheryl Mills, they got immunity.
Well, the whole thing.
Even though they lied.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that was, that's part of, Act 1, where the FBI just gave a pass to the Clintons and did this outrageous stuff that, like kindergarten investigations, with no subpoenas, no search warrants, no grand jury, no nothing. I mean, it was a sham. It was an absolute total sham.
It's horrible. And I know it hurts you because of all of your proud years at the FBI, Jim. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Jim Kallstrom, it's always a pleasure. Good to see you.
Thank you, Maria.
There was coordination between Loretta Lynch's DOJ and the FBI. How do you know?
Well, I mean, we know because we have a number of documents, a growing body of evidence, Brian, that now would suggest that Director Comey, who under sworn testimony a number of times have said there was no coordination between Loretta Lynch's DOJ and our FBI investigation. Not only was that false, but we know that over and over again now, we have emails that would suggest that that testimony was false and at best misled the American public, at worst was lying to Congress. And here we are today with emails, text messages that says that even the no coordination message that Director Comey put out on that infamous day in July was actually suggested by the Department of Justice.
Here's the text. Timing looks like hell, Peter Strzok says to Lisa Page, will appear choreographed. All major news networks literally leading with the AG to accept the FBI director's recommendation. Yeah, this is awful. Nothing we can do about it. I mean, this is like a third-rate movie playing out on text messages. These people are supposed to be guarding our secrets and seeking truth and justice. They don't even know how to secure their own texts.
Well, it's interesting that they would go back and forth saying that the timing looks awful, but there's even another email from the Department of Justice that would indicate that on how to articulate the exoneration of Hillary Clinton. And so as we look at that, there's also additional evidence that would suggest that DOJ narrowed the scope of the Hillary investigation to make sure that she was exonerated.
Mark Meadows, thanks for joining us. Keep that staff working because we need to get the facts. Appreciate it.
The abuses at the Obama Justice Department and FBI in front of the FISA court go to the bone of the function of the Justice Department. And the key to this, the key to the lying and the misrepresentations to the FISA court is going to be John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, and the senior officials at the Justice Department. When there is a federal grand jury, in addition to the Nunes Committee investigation into the State Department, people will be forced by subpoena to give testimony as senior Department of State officials who are currently there or who have left. I think it will be demonstrated that they colluded with Clinton administration representatives and campaign officials and people like Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer, who passed on completely unreliable information, which they hoped would be passed along to the FBI, and in fact it was, and that information was used fraudulently to obtain FISA warrants. This is why, Lou, the only way to get these answers, once the Nunes Committee is done, is to have a federal grand jury force all of these State Department people, CIA, DNI people, FBI, DOJ senior people, under oath in a grand jury. It's the only way we're ever going to get the full story.
And to add another twist, Lou, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, is a witness. He should be recused from this altogether because he's going to have to testify why he signed a FISA application.
Comey and Strzok and all of those people, including senior Justice Department officials, this was a plot, a brazen plot to exonerate Hillary Clinton in the email server case to ensure that she became president. And if by chance she lost, part of the plot was to frame Donald Trump with a false crime. And that's why the Steele dossier was used. It was designed to create a false narrative about Trump and his people and to be used ultimately against them if Hillary Clinton lost. This is why this is the single most important scandal of the last 50 years, because senior DOJ and FBI officials engaged in conduct that was designed to corrupt an American presidential election. It wasn't the Russians who corrupted the presidential election. It was the American officials at the Department of Justice and the FBI.
I think we have ample facts revealed to us during this last year and a half that high-ranking people throughout the government, not just the FBI, high-ranking people had a plot to not have Hillary Clinton, indicted so that she could remain the flawed candidate that she was, which in my view was stupidity. And they also had and even this Strzok guy talked about this. They had a backup plan to basically frame Donald Trump. Right. And that's what's been going on. This whole thing, in my view, is just total phony. I mean, how would you feel, someone out there in America land, if somebody was just had a phony scheme about you and went on for months and months and months?
Yeah,
and that's what's going on.
We're going to discover that the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, her deputy, Sally Yates, the head of the National Security Division, John Carlin, Bruce Orr, and other senior DOJ officials and regrettably line attorneys, people who were senior career civil servants, violated the law, perhaps committed crimes, and covered up crimes by a presidential candidate. But more than that, they tried to frame an incoming president with a false Russian conspiracy that never existed, and they knew it, and they plotted to ruin him as a candidate and then destroy him as a president. That's why this is important. That's why connecting the dots is important, because the FBI now has to be completely reconstructed from the ground up. The men and women at the Bureau are great people. That's not who we're talking about. We never have been. We are talking about people like James Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, Baker, Prystep, who is a name nobody knows. He's the head of the counterintelligence division, and he was the one who was involved in planning this entire crazy thing involving Fusion GPS, the false dossier, and creating evidence. This is what people have to understand. What the Bureau did was, by working with Fusion GPS and giving contractors access to highly classified information which they had no legal right to see, they needed to create something they could give to the court, the Foreign Intelligence Court, so that they could get wiretaps and surveillance taps and email taps and phone taps on the Trump people, so that if there was anything, they could find it out. Of course, there was nothing. There never was anything. And they created false facts so that they could get surveillance warrants. Those are all crimes. Every single one of those acts constitutes a crime because it was done not for a legitimate law enforcement reason, not for national security reasons, but to create a false case against a candidate, Donald Trump, a president-elect, Donald Trump, and a president, Donald Trump. The FISA court opinion of April 27th of 2017 outlines a series of illegal disclosures to contractors. It is believed that among those contractors were Fusion GPS and CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is the company that was used to bleach Hillary's computer. CrowdStrike, if what is being reported is true, and I've seen 2 reports about CrowdStrike being among the private contractors that were given access to raw 702 incidental collection of American citizens under FISA warrants. If that is true, they have committed crimes. The Bureau who gave them information committed crimes. There is huge civil liability for CrowdStrike and for the FBI officials. And right now, there's at least 2 lawsuits pending against Mr. Steele, the former MI6 agent who wrote the Steele dossier at the payment of Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS has been sued. I expect if these facts come out from the FISA court showing that these contractors got this information, they will all be sued. Now, they may declare bankruptcy and not be able to pay, but the people don't realize that this is already on the public record, that these things happen. The question which has been blanked out from this opinion, as you can see, this is all dark, all through the opinion. What they've done is they've blanked out the names of the contractors and the names of the FBI and DOJ officials who broke the law. That is going to come out. That's what Nunes has. He has all that information now. He knows what's in these blanks that the court blanked out. The court did the right thing. It's not supposed to reveal that. But once you start doing oversight, constitutional oversight, those blanks go away to Congress. And we will know shortly who the private contractors were that were allowed to break the law by the FBI. This is as bad as it gets. When you have the government, the FBI and the DOJ being absolutely corrupted because of their motivations, and when you have the journalistic community being bought, it seems to me that's pretty bad for all the institutions involved. And journalism is now below Congress in terms of approval ratings. This is not going to help them. What's fascinating to me is how the people who want to defend everything that the Bureau has done or the Department of Justice or the Clintons have turned to a series of narratives to replace the truth. For example, once this whole thing broke, when President Trump said, "I was spied on by the President of the United States," he was laughed at. In fact, he was spied on by the President of the United States, by Barack Obama, under Barack Obama's orders, and under the orders of John Brennan, and Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, and Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, and Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor. Because what they did, which was part of a scheme which began in the year 2016, was to try to figure out a way to help Hillary Clinton get elected by exonerating her in her email scandal in her private server in New York, and then she would be elected, and then the problem of Donald Trump would go away. The problem was she lost. And when she lost, they had time between the election in November of 2016 and the time between the president was inaugurated to try and do damage, to cover up what they had done with Fusion GPS and a bunch of other people before the election, and to make it perfect after the election, to secure the storyline. And so, interestingly enough, people, there are some real heroes in this story. And part of it is how you defeat these competing narratives. You'll recall that first there's the story about the dossier, the so-called Fusion GPS dossier, which we now know was developed with the assistance of the FBI, Christopher Steele, the former spy from England, Bruce Orr, a senior Justice Department official in the Obama administration, Bruce Orr's wife, who was an employee of Fusion GPS and a Russian expert. That all of a sudden became something that people got worried about on the Democratic side and on the protect the Clinton side. Then all of a sudden, when the dossier got even stronger and stronger as a result of the knowledge about Bruce Orr's involvement, the dialogue shifted. And then it became that the dossier really wasn't important because George Papadopoulos, this know-nothing young guy who had been a end-of-the-room foreign policy advisor, was the real guy who got the investigation into the president's collusion with the Russians started as a result of a drunken blathering in a bar to the Australian ambassador, who then told MI6 in London. These narratives have developed because the facts are now so strong that there was a brazen plot to exonerate Hillary Clinton, and then if she lost, frame the President of the United States with a false crime, that this is what they have been forced to do. One of the heroes in this entire story is Admiral Mike Rogers, the head of the National Security Agency. He became the head of the National Security Agency in 2014. In 2015, one of the auditors at the National Security Agency, our electronic surveillance SIGINT masterpiece from World War II, came to him and said, there's some funny things going on at the FBI with regard to 702, which of course is that part of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows the scooping up of huge amounts of phone call data and emails and electronic data about foreigners. And in the course of that, allows the incidental collection of information about Americans, which is supposed to be kept secret, but wasn't in this case because of the conduct of the FBI and the Obama administration Justice Department officials. Mike Rogers says, okay, let's do an audit. He does this in March of 2016. This is way in advance of the election. He then discovers, as a result of the audit, that the FBI has been sharing this secret data about Americans with not other government agencies, but private contractors. Some of those contractors apparently work for the Democratic National Committee. Some of them work for Fusion GPS. Mr. Rogers, Admiral Rogers, says, okay, the court, the FISC court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, has been lied to. They have not been told about this. And things have been told to them which are not true. He said, I'm going to the court. I'm going to tell the court. Rogers goes to the court on his own and informs the court about these problems. Now, prior to him being able to do that, the Justice Department and the FBI learn about what he's done, about the audit and what he's discovered. And so they go to the court first to inform the court that they have discovered these problems with illegal activity. Doesn't make any difference. It's too late. The court now knows what has happened. So he goes to the court, they go to the court, and then in April of 2016, the FISA court issues this 99-page opinion, which I'll bet you didn't even know about until I talked about it this morning. This opinion describes illegal activity by the FBI, illegal activity by contractors, and it calls it the improper disclosure of raw intelligence about Americans to unauthorized individuals. All of those things that the Bureau did and the contractors were crimes. Now, you wouldn't think, this is a public document now. It's been declassified. You have not seen a single story about this in the Washington Post or the New York Times. So, with this in hand, and remember, Rogers knows all about this before the election. So as soon as the election is held, Rogers determines that since there is now a president-elect who has been spied upon, he knows that Trump was the subject of a plot. So Rogers goes to visit President-elect Trump in New York in November of 2016, on the 17th of November. He's the head of the NSA. He briefs the president. And it is after that briefing, the very next day, that President-elect Trump moves his entire staff out of Trump Tower to Bedminster, New Jersey, where his golf club is, and that's where the transition team stays until Trump Tower is debugged. What Admiral Rogers did was, and this is why the president said that President Obama had wiretapped him. Rogers, on that day, November 17th, briefed the president about the illegal activities which had been reported to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court earlier in the year. And the president knew what had happened at that point. Now, interestingly enough, when the outgoing administration found that Admiral Rogers had gone to New York, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, John Clapper, and John Brennan, the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, asked President Obama to fire Admiral Rogers. Now, President Obama had many flaws, but he ain't no dummy. And he said, boys, it's too late. I'm not going to fire Admiral Rogers, because if I do, that'll be the only story about my last days in office, so you can forget it. And Rogers is there to this day. And when this story is written, when it's all over, the great hero will not be Robert Mueller, this crazy man that has been made the special counsel. It won't be the people on the Hill, except for Devin Nunes, who is a real hero, who has stood up under the most incredible personal attacks from real sleazeballs like Adam Schiff, this loony congressman from California. And it will be shown that Admiral Rogers saved the day by forcing the senior Justice Department officials to admit that they had done wrong things. Now, there's another fascinating part of this story. In October of 2016, when Admiral Rogers is going to the court and forcing the Justice Department to advise the court that they had submitted false documents, that they, the DOJ, had submitted, unwittingly had submitted false documents, as they say. Admiral Rogers, plans are being made to fire him at that point, which of course never go forward because of what he does by going to New York. All of this has come to a head at that point, and the court is now learning for the first time about this unbelievable activity. For the first time in the history of the FISA court, it has been lied to, and according to the court, systematically and ongoing violations of the law. This is stunning stuff, and it's all because of Admiral Rogers. And that's where we are today. We are now at the point where Nunes has discovered this. He discovered it back in March when he went to the White House, and all of these documents were turned over to him by the incoming National Security Council staff. And so now we'll watch it play out. By the way, in October of 2016, the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the National Security Division at Justice for the Obama administration, and the person who was responsible for signing the pleadings that went to the court was a fellow named John Carlin. Once this material was submitted to the court in October of 2016, revealing the violations of the law, Carlin resigned and has not been heard from since. No one could figure out why Carlin resigned. And I don't know why he resigned. There was plenty of time left in the administration. He just left. Now, it may have been that you resigned because you don't want to be questioned by the Inspector General, who at that point had already begun an investigation of the FBI and the DOJ senior people based on Admiral Rogers' complaints. So that's another story that's going to play out. Where is John Carlin and what is he doing? The Russian collusion was a complete fabrication of the Democratic National Committee, the Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS, senior DOJ and FBI officials to create a way to dirty up Trump as a candidate and then destroy him as a president. There is literally no evidence whatsoever that has ever been produced of any conspiracy. And let me just say something that I find deeply offensive. The appointment of the special counsel was completely unnecessary. There was no need for a special counsel. I don't know why Rod Rosenstein did it, but he did it. But there was no justification for it. And in fact, in his appointment letter and memorandum about it, he admits there's no crime that's been discovered, but for political reasons, this needs to be investigated. Well, that's just utter nonsense. Look what he's done to an incoming president. Look at what he's done to the country by appointing a special counsel. That should have been handed off to a bunch of senior DOJ officials who are being monitored by a political appointee who would keep them within the legitimate bounds of an investigation. Mueller has not brought one charge involving collusion with Russians. He's never going to bring a charge involving collusion because there was none. The bottom line is this. Mueller and the way he has conducted his investigation is an embarrassment to anyone who's ever been a special counsel, which I was. I was an independent counsel. Hiring all of these partisan Democrats to conduct the investigation, he's not naive. Bob Mueller's been around too long. You can't be that dumb to not realize how horrible it is to have these people. These people are not biased against the president. They have an animus toward the president. There is a distinct difference. I believe that his entire investigation, Mueller's entire investigation, has been tainted by this animus. There's no way you can have people who have donated to the Clintons, donated to Obama, represented the Clinton Foundation, represented Clinton individuals in criminal investigations, and then have those people who have given to President Trump's opponent investigate President Trump. I don't know what Mueller is thinking of.
Since you're bringing up the Mueller investigation and the apparent focus on investigating Trump's Russian collusion, isn't it interesting that Mueller and Comey and Rosenstein and others were involved in a Russia collusion story for Obama Clinton?
Mueller, first of all, never should have been appointed because there was no need for a special counsel. That's number one. Number two, he never should have been appointed because he knows James Comey. They're personal and professional friends and have been so for many years. Comey is a target of this investigation. He's clearly been involved in activities which could be deemed illegal and criminal. There's no way Mueller can investigate him or anybody else at the senior people that he worked with. And yet, here he is investigating Russian collusion when he presided over, as FBI director, the investigation into Uranium One, which was a clear kickback bribery scheme by the Russians to bribe Bill Clinton as ex-president with speech money, to bribe Hillary Clinton with speech money for her husband and $145 million in contributions to the Clinton Foundation, and to get a result of selling 20% of the uranium supply of the United States to a Russian-controlled company. The notion that Mueller could investigate that, having been a party to the investigation, is ridiculous. But here's the other thing. Mueller, who was FBI director at the time, knew about the Uranium-1 investigation of Russian corruption and bribery. Did he go to tell James Comey or anybody at the Justice Department that this case was under investigation and that they should warn CFIUS, the committee that approves foreign investment? Did he go? And if he went to see somebody in the Justice Department, like let's say he went to see Eric Holder, and Eric Holder, who sits on CFIUS, says, I don't think that's relevant to the sale of Uranium-1. Or did Eric say, okay, fine, I'll let him know. We do not know what CFIUS was told about Uranium-1. There have been published reports that they were told nothing about it. And here's the other part of this. If Mueller knew that this was there, why didn't he go to CFIUS on his own and say, I don't know what you're being told, but I'm going to report to you that this is pretty serious stuff and you need to know about it? He didn't do that. Why didn't Mueller do that? And so what we're left with is this nagging sensation that all of a sudden these really great investigators lose all of their skills and nobody talks to anybody about Uranium-1. The other thing is this. Everybody always says in defense of Hillary, well, she was only one of 9. There were 9 agencies. But they forget the most important fact of all. It only takes 1 vote to stop a deal. Hers. And you know what? She was bought. She wasn't going to vote no. She knew about the bribery that was going on. Her husband was involved in it. She could have stopped the Uranium-1 sale with 1 vote. That's all it takes in CFIUS. If 1 member of CFIUS, 1 of 9, says no, it is done. She didn't vote no, and she could have. So the answer to this is, it's not that she was 1 of 9, it's that she was 1 of 9, and she didn't stop it.